And then you have your your hooking vines, which, like I said, are really climbers. Climbing roses and bougainvillea, they both have those thorns. But we're just going to talk about the climbing roses. You should know that climbing roses come in, big and super big. There aren't very many particularly diminutive climbing roses. That's why they call it a rose-covered cottage, is because that rose grows clear over the cottage and covers it in roses, which is quite beautiful. But that sort of thing makes my husband very nervous because all those leaves are dropping into the gutters, and who knows what's happening to the roof. But if you're a diehard gardener, you don't care. You do it anyway. And you should know that a lot of times you don't have to prune your climbing roses. A friend of mine has what's called Paul's climbing Himalayan musk, and it is 20 or 30 feet up in a pine, which itself is 40 feet. And the pine just keeps ahead of it, and it keeps climbing up inside and then spilling out the side. And it just looks like a waterfall of beautiful pink roses when it blooms. And then the rest of the year, it just sort of disappears. So you can actually use a climbing rose that way if it is well matched to its tree. And I also had a situation where a customer of mine had a climbing rose on the side of her house. And, of course, there's wire trellising along there to tie it in to. And you don't have to do major pruning on it every year. I would just nibble at it from time to time and tie in the new canes and cut back the canes that were flinging out into the pathway, ripping people's faces. And that's a perfectly good way to keep your rose. But after many, many years, you can have quite a buildup of dead, huge canes, old canes, dead canes, and dead wood, which is why many people choose to prune them annually, and pretty hard at that. This is an example of a climbing rose that has been tied to some rebar arches, which are themselves planted every so often in this garden. So you take the main cane that you want and you tie it in the horizontal position. I should mention that roses don't bloom so much on the canes that go straight up. As soon as you can, you want to bend those canes over in the spring while they're soft and supple and tie them in the horizontal position, because then all the little laterals, which is fancy gardener talk for side branches, all the little side branches will pop out and have a ton of flowers on them. So in this case, we're tying one or more of the main canes to this arching area and maybe shortening them by a third, not more than a third, and you don't have to shorten them at all unless they're getting in the way of something. And then you tie it to the arch, whether it's an arbor or a trellis, whatever you have. And then you shorten all the side bits to about, all the laterals to 3 to 6 inches long. And you do this in the winter. Some people do it in the early winter. Some people do it in the late winter. It doesn't really matter. And those laterals in the summer will shoot out, some of them as many as 6 feet, and bloom and be beautiful. You should know that during the summer, if those laterals do shoot out way too far and are molesting people, you can just nibble them back, especially after they're through blooming. Just like a hybrid rose, you can keep cutting on it and it will keep forcing new flowers to bloom. So don't be afraid. If you are doing this, say, up a chimney or the side of a house, you want to keep that permanent framework or semi-permanent framework of the long parent stems many years, and then occasionally take out a big one and let a new one replace it. You could leave them all on forever, but like I said, you get quite a nightmare, a big buildup, and then you have to do a radical renovation, and that's really scary because you're afraid you're going to kill your rose. And just know the bigger the cane is, about the time it gets the size around as your wrist, as big around as your wrist, we are really concerned that if you cut it back to 2 to 4 inches, it may die instead of sending up new canes. So we like to keep a fair number of younger canes arising from the graft union, which is near the ground, so that in case that big one does die when we finally have to cut it out, there are some younger replacement canes. Roses, like the other cane growers, renew themselves by sending up new canes from the ground every year. And you can cut all the little teeny, puny, twiggy ones off because they're complicating things. And if you so choose, and it's time, you can cut out a couple of the really big old canes, and the rest of them you tie to your trellis or your arbor, or keep tied to your trellis or your arbor, and then work on all those laterals. Here's a climbing rose that's been carefully pruned year after year. Notice that the canes are all very young, and they are tied. See, the tie is tying those canes so that they bend over, because ones that bend over bloom all along the cane, not just at the top. And, you have to be kind of a masochist and actually a bit of a sadist to be a gardener. The ones that are devoted to gardening actually enjoy the challenge of dealing with thorny things. You want to wear your leather gloves and try to do it with long sleeves. Don't try this with a sweater. And here is that same climbing rose blooming its head off. Isn't that darling? So that's it for roses. I think I covered everything. And the roses get a lot of those leaf cruds too, powdery mildew, black spot, and keeping it thinned out will reduce the amount of that disease, probably never eliminate it, but keeping them thinned out by removing canes periodically and removing some of the laterals and shortening a bunch of the others will help keep it looking as good as it can.